There is a moment late in a night watch, when the palace feels like it belongs to no one, when the corridor's empty and the building breathes on its own, and the only sound is the faint shift of a torch sconce in the draft. I know that silence better than I know most words. I stood the deep interior for 11 years before the night the warrant came. My post on the vault corridor was the quietest assignment at Ravenscroft Hall. The House of Veldrain kept its most sensitive holdings in the old strong room at the corridor's end. Bound ledgers, sealed letters the household seal matrix, and 3 locked deed boxes that had not been opened in my time there. None of it required glamour. It required a man who would stand still, think slowly, and trust what did not feel right. Captain Aldersham had told me that on my first day, and I had never found a reason to doubt him. Most nights nothing came down that corridor at all. A duty officer at midnight making his rounds, a nod, a clipboard checked, gone. A housekeeper once, disoriented and looking for the laundry passage 2 floors below, the occasional creak of the stonework settling against the cold. 11 years of small sounds and long silences had taught me to treat each with the same steady attention. The one that felt unremarkable was always the one to watch most carefully. The clock in the upper hall struck 1:30 when I heard footsteps. Not a servant's soft step, not the measured pace of the night duty officer making his rounds. These were the deliberate footsteps of a man who believed he had every right to be where he was, which, in my experience, is precisely the sound a man makes when he does not. He came into the corridor lamplight with a leather satchel over one shoulder and a folded document in his hand. Well-dressed, a dark coat with brass fittings, good boots, the kind of collar pin that signals connections rather than money. He was perhaps 40, lean, with close-cropped gray at his temples and the confident expression of a man accustomed to bureaucratic deference. He held the document out before he had even stopped walking, which was itself a small tell. A man with a legitimate order usually lets the guard speak first. "Night access," he said. "Letters patent signed by the household registrar. Routine inventory audit." I did not move from the center of the corridor. I looked at the document. It was a letters patent, on the correct cream stock, with the correct format. The household registrar's seal was pressed into the bottom right corner, and a signature ran across the authorization line in the flowing hand I had seen on every legitimate order that had ever reached this post. I took it from him and read it. Then I read it again. He shifted his weight. "There's a time notation on it," he said pleasantly. 1:30, you'll see." I saw. What I also saw was the watermark. The genuine Veldrain household stock carries a nested V watermark pressed from the paper's interior, not printed, not stamped, but woven into the pulp itself when the paper is made. Held at an angle to a lamp, the correct stock shows a faint, slightly irregular V inside a V, soft-edged as a shadow. I had held enough genuine household orders over 11 years to know exactly how it looked. This one held clean to the lamp and showed nothing. A printed watermark, flat and sharp-edged, applied to ordinary foolscap. Good work, close enough to deceive a man glancing, close enough to deceive a man who had never paid attention. But I had paid attention because there was nothing else to do at 1:30 in a quiet corridor except pay attention. I handed the document back to him. "I'll need to hold you here while I contact the duty officer," I said. My voice was level. I did not raise it, did not lower it, and I did not take a step backward. His pleasant expression did not waver, but something shifted behind his eyes, a recalculation, very small and very fast, the kind that happens when a plan meets the one obstacle it did not account for. "The time notation," he said again. "The registrar cleared this personally. It would be unnecessarily disruptive." "The duty officer will have the registrar's contact number," I said. "He will reach him at home if necessary." He looked at me for a long moment. A man used to institutional deference reads very quickly when deference has been withdrawn, and something in the set of my shoulders told him that no version of this conversation ended with me stepping aside. He held the document out again, as though repetition might accomplish what authority had not. "You understand what this document authorizes," he said. His tone had dropped, no longer pleasant, only flat. "I understand what a genuine one would authorize," I said. "I'll contact the duty officer now." I pressed the wall-mounted call switch and did not take my eyes off him. He did not run. I had half expected that, and I was ready if it came to it, but he did not. He stood where he was, the satchel at his side, the document still extended in one hand, and waited. That surprised me not because it was a sign of innocence, but because it was the response of someone who had been through a version of this before and knew that flight was the faster route to a cell. He had calculated the odds of talking his way past me and decided they were still better than running blind through a palace he did not know. So he waited, and I stood. The lamp burned between us, and the corridor held its silence the way it always did, patient and indifferent, as though whatever happened in it was simply one more thing to absorb. Lieutenant Keswick arrived in 4 minutes. He was followed 2 minutes after that by Sergeant Andra with 2 guardsmen. I gave the lieutenant the document, told him what I had observed, and he held the paper to the corridor lamp himself. His expression did not change, but his jaw tightened. "Your name," he said to the man. The man gave one. Whether it was his, I never formally learned. That determination passed out of my hands and into the household security offices, and by morning into the hands of the civil constabulary. What I learned later was that the satchel contained copying materials and a wax impression kit of the kind used to take mold castings of door furniture and lock plates. He had been thorough in his preparation. He simply had not prepared for a man who held documents to the light. Lieutenant Keswick came to find me at the change of watch the next morning. He had a habit of standing beside a man rather than in front of him when he wished to speak plainly, and he stood beside me at the corridor window and looked out at the empty courtyard for a moment before he said anything. The courtyard was grey and still. 2 guardsmen were crossing it below us at the pace of the morning changeover, and Keswick watched them the way he watched most things, as though he were cataloguing rather than simply seeing. "The registrar confirmed he signed no such order," Keswick said. "The paper was sourced commercially. The signature is a forgery, a clean one, but not clean enough under comparison." I nodded. "What gave it away?" he asked. "The watermark," I said. "It wasn't there." He was quiet for a moment. "Most men wouldn't have known to look." "Most men aren't at this post at 1:30, I said. "There's not much else to do." He looked at me then and almost smiled, or at least the tightness around his eyes eased in a way that, on Keswick's face, amounted to the same thing. He had been an officer for a long time, and he did not offer praise for things that were simply part of the job. But there was something in the steadiness of his attention that told me the matter had been correctly handled, and that was enough. The strong room was relocked and re-inspected that morning. The 3 deed boxes were confirmed untouched. The household seal matrix, which I later learned was the most likely target, being reproducible and enabling a range of fraudulent instruments far beyond a single night's work, had not been reached. The satchel, when fully inventoried, contained copying papers, a wax impression kit, and 2 blank warrant forms on commercial stock that matched what he had presented at my post. Someone had invested considerable preparation in the enterprise. They had simply not accounted for a man with 11 years of nothing to do but notice things. I went back to my post that afternoon and stood it as I had stood it every afternoon before. The corridor was quiet. The lamps burned. The strong room door sat in the shadows at the far end, solid and unchanged. Captain Aldersham came by near evening, which was unusual. He was a man of the morning and preferred to conduct his business before noon. He did not stop at the corridor's entrance. He walked its full length and stood beside the strong room door for a moment, looking at the lock, and then at the flagstone floor in front of it, as though reading something in the way the stone wore smooth at the threshold. Then he turned and walked back, and as he passed me he said, without breaking stride, "Good work, Croft." That was all, 2 words, barely slowing his step. It was, for the captain, a speech. I stood my remaining hours thinking about the weight of small things, the difference between a printed mark and a pressed one, between a man who glances and a man who reads. No alarm had been raised, no confrontation loud enough to carry beyond these walls. A forged warrant had come to a vault door, and it had been stopped with 3 words and a call switch. The vault never opened. Most of the household did not know that night that anything had been close, and those who did say little about it even now. The wrong had been clean and careful and almost convincing. It failed because of the watermark, a detail most men would not have known to check, a test that only mattered because someone had stood still long enough to learn it. That is what years at a quiet post teach you, not indifference, attention, the slow accumulation of small knowledge that has no value until the one night it has every value. That is the work, not always the dramatic moments, or rather, not only those. Mostly it is a man in a quiet corridor holding a piece of paper to the light and trusting what 11 years of standing still have taught him to see. I returned to my post the next night and the night after that, and stood the deep interior as I always had. The clock in the upper hall still struck its half hours. The draft from somewhere above still moved the torch sconce. Nothing came down that corridor that I did not look at carefully. Nothing ever came down that corridor at half, past 1 with quite the same confidence again.